All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Monday Morning Human Intelligence. So 30 minutes to get your week started off right, to shake up your brain. We have a great guest with us today. We're really honored to have Karen with us. We'll get to her in just a second. But for those of you who are joining us, we would love to have you turn on your video. Being able to see human faces is always something that is helpful for all of us, particularly the folks that are speaking, so they're not talking into the abyss. They can actually speak to another human. We've got the chat open as well, so feel free to put in any comments or things that come up in your brain, or links or things that you think of in the chat there as well, and then we'll be able to share that, and we'll all benefit from that information. Questions, feel free to post there as well. We'll have plenty of time for questions as we come up near the end also. And I will, as always, thanks to Rebecca for making sure that Monday Morning Human Intelligence works. And Rebecca, would you mind giving us a couple words about Karen before we let Karen speak for herself as well?
For sure. Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. And thanks for being here, Karen. So Karen Hold is the co-author of the soon-to-be-released book, The Innovator's Journey. She's passionate about creating creative capacity in individuals, organizations, and cities. And she is a visiting director lecturer at Darton School of Business and is the founder of a design strategy firm called Experience Labs. And Trish, thank you for the introduction. And Karen, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about design thinking, specifically the difference and the distinction between doing design thinking and being a design thinker. But to ensure that we are scoping the discussion appropriately, let's do a poll real quick about your experience with design thinking. So I'll launch this poll here. Look. So it looks like the majority, certainly the majority of the folks are aware of design thinking, practice design thinking, and live design thinking in most things they do. So this will be a really interesting discussion, but we'll make sure that the person who voted for what is design thinking, we'll make sure that we are talking to you as well. So Karen, to get the discussion started, first of all, congratulations on your upcoming book as well. I can't wait to see that myself. But can you give us just a quick overview of design thinking, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the subject.
Sure. So design thinking is really a problem-solving methodology. It's a collection of tools and behaviors and mindsets that are really good for solving complex problems. It's good for solving problems that have humans involved, so there is a behavior change that's involved in the problem. It's really great for problems that are complex, that you don't have a lot of data about previously to solve that challenge. It's really great for problems that you don't already have the answer to. If you have a problem and you know the answer to it, design thinking is probably not a great problem solving set to use for that. But it's really great for complex problems, for problems that you don't know the answer to, and problems that involve humans with human behavior. Then you need to understand their behavior and their mindsets and how you might be able to make changes.
Awesome, thank you. So in the workshops that we teach, when we talk about design thinking and we talk about design, I like to say that good design solves problems, but not just, right? That good design will certainly solve the problem that I have today, but it also is thoughtful enough to think about the problems that maybe even I didn't realize that I had, and work to solve those as well. So I'm curious, in your experience, do you think that corresponds with your thoughts, or do you have some other definition of good design that you like to use?
Oh, I think that's a great definition, and I think that recognizes that design is really a social technology. I like to think of design as a social technology. So much of our thinking and the way we solve problems within organizations is around convergent thinking. It's about driving out variance, and design thinking actually leverages the diversity of our organization and leverages the diversity of our team members to drive creativity and thrive on that diversity. We know that the best solutions actually come from diverse teams, and design thinking being used as a social technology really allows us to leverage the diversity of our teams and help us get to better solutions. But that's hard because we often, when we're working across difference, we often come into conflict. We all have different ways of working, different sides of the business, different sides of the organization have different ways of working. And so a social technology, which is really just a collection of tools for how to work together, is really helpful to work across that difference.
I think that's a great point. When we talk about creativity, and we talk about ideation, the research says that the broader the experiences and the broader the more diversity that you can add to the team, the more ideas you're going to get, right? And I say that creativity is a failing game, that you are repeatedly failing and then you keep working through it and you find a new way to do things. But also the research says that the more diverse your team is, the harder it is after that ideation phase to start narrowing in on what are we actually going to do? Like, how are we going to make a decision, and which of these options are we going to execute? Do you have any tips for folks that have sort of worked past that ideation phase? They have lots of possibilities, but they need to start getting into what do we actually make work?
Right. Well, I think if you have leveraged the tools, then teams that have aligned earlier in the process then find that implementation much easier to do. And I'd love to show you, a couple of slides about how we think about design thinking, and I mean my co-authors. So let me introduce you to my partners in crime, who I am. From the start, who I am doing this research with and writing my book with. These are my co-authors: Jean Litka, who is a professor of design thinking at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. She was the Dean of Deans at Darden this last year, and Jessica Eldridge, who is my co-author, who was also a research assistant for Jean. What I mentioned earlier about this paradox of diversity, right? In difference lies that potential for enhanced creativity, but also in conflict, right? Convergent thinking seeks efficiency, and divergent thinking seeks this creativity. So what do I really mean when I say that design thinking is a social technology? Well, design thinking looks like a set of activities that innovators do. And for those of you that are familiar with design thinking, we use, similar vocabulary. The flavor of design thinking that you may use, might use different vocabulary, but the activity set probably looks very familiar to you, right? In design thinking, we start with gathering data. We identify insights from that data. We establish design criteria. And design criteria, you might call them design pillars, but design criteria are really the attributes of the future that we hope to achieve, the ideal future. From there, we generate ideas, begin to visualize solutions, and then move into testing. So this series of activities, though, also has a sequence of personal experiences that innovators experience. So when we're gathering data, we're immersing ourselves into the lives of our users. We're trying to understand what their worldview is and what the context of their behaviors are. And then when we move into identifying insights, we're really trying to make sense of their world and not make sense of our own world. Often when we're working on design projects and people are behaving very differently than we might behave, what we're having trouble doing is separating our own context and our own worldview from someone else's. So in sense making, we're really trying to understand somebody else's world and remove our own worldview from that understanding. So here's where I get to this question around alignment, right? When we're establishing design criteria, it is not enough to personally and individually, because sense making is really an individual activity. But establishing design criteria is really a group activity. That's really a team activity. And when you can align as a team on what you feel the ideal solution is, that may require you to give up some of your own beliefs of what you think the future should be. And it's really there in that alignment and establishing that alignment with a team that the team creates the confidence and leverages the diversity of the team to generate ideas that really emerge from the team. And unless you can align as a team, we often see that those ideas fizzle out. Like you mentioned, they begin to fizzle out because there is no alignment and there is no confidence in the team. There is no leveraging of the diversity of the team in order to keep that idea strengthened and strong enough to make it through the testing process. So as we move into prototyping and begin to visualize, what that idea is and to begin to make it real, and then move into testing and alignment with each other. So I really think it's in this alignment that our ideas are strengthened and stronger. All of this to say that these experiences help us become someone different than we are when we begin working and using design, right? It's one thing to gather data and it's another thing to immerse yourself into someone else's world. And it's the act of immersing into someone else's world that makes you become more empathetic and curious. It's one thing to identify insights that make sense to you. It's another thing altogether to make sense of someone else's world and then to become inspired and open to uncertainty. It's one thing to establish design criteria that you think the future should look like. It's another thing altogether to align as a team and to become really user-centered and truly possibility-driven. It's one thing to generate ideas, but another thing altogether to have those ideas emerge from a group and have comfort with co-creation and divergence. It's another one thing to visualize solutions and make things. We're all familiar with making prototypes if we're familiar with doing design thinking. It's another thing altogether to materialize those and immerse someone into a new future that makes those ideas feel really real. Then it's one thing to begin to test your ideas, and another thing altogether to co-create and learn from others and adapt.
Right.
So learning.
So thank you for that. I think that's a great, easy to see and easy to follow explanation of sort of the difference between doing and being, right? And the bridge between those is clearly the experiencing as well. If I can ask you to stop sharing your screen for a second. I know that we've got lots of questions that are coming up in the chat, and I think Rebecca has a question for you as well. So we'll go to Rebecca.
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot, and now right, and Donna brought up a really good question. Well, you touched on convergent and divergent thinking, right? And so I come from a world where design thinking was not a term until very recently. Like Trish brought it up, and I knew what you were doing with Steph, and I was thinking, what is design thinking? And then when you and I started talking, I was like, okay, this is starting to make sense. So when you say convergent and divergent thinking, are those two terms also design thinking? What other terms do people use? Because it seems like such a broad concept and there's so much psychology behind it. And I really love how you touched on social technology. So to me, it's a new world, like design thinking. What does that mean? So what else do people call it?
What else do people call design thinking?
Yeah.
Well, they're sort of kissing cousins with things like lean and agile, and other problem-solving sets that really celebrate mindsets and behaviors that allow us to leverage diversity across our team. So I'd say kissing cousins are,
I love
lean
that.
and agile. Yeah.
I love it. What motivated you to get into teaching?
I sort of landed into teaching. I'll tell you what motivated me to get into design thinking. So almost 30 years ago, when I was working on the Folgers coffee brand, if any of you remember a world pre-Starbucks, when Folgers was the coffee brand in America, larger than Maxwell House. Starbucks was a regional business in the Pacific Northwest, $165 million business. So it wasn't insignificant, but it wasn't the behemoth that it is today. And Folgers was close to $1 billion business. And as an organization, we relied on Nielsen syndicated data to make all of our decisions. So again, convergent thinking, right? As an organization, we made all of our decisions using data, and our data set was Nielsen syndicated data. So the younger members of the brand team knew that there was something to this Starbucks experience, and we thought that we should be responding to this as an organization, right? We're the largest coffee brand. We should be responding. So we sent a team of executives to Seattle. They drove around to 25 different coffee houses, came back to Cincinnati, and decided that Starbucks wasn't a threat because it didn't show up in our data. And that said, coffee, Nielsen syndicated data captured grocery store sales, club stores, mass merchandisers, and convenience stores. And that was not the channel that Starbucks was selling through. So as far as we saw in our data, there was no threat, right? So fast forward 20 years, right? I couldn't understand this. I ended up leaving P&G. I couldn't understand this, but fast forward 20 years, Starbucks is a $22 billion business. Folgers is a $2 billion business. Starbucks generates 10 times the economic impact that Folgers did. And we were in a position to be the next Starbucks, right? We had the primary relationships with the farmers. So Starbucks had to buy picked over beans at the port that we didn't want. But they took an inferior product and turned it into a superior experience because they gave the consumer what they wanted. And if we had been a design thinking organization then, we would have said, okay, we make our decisions with data, right? But let's run some experiments, right? We are picking up opportunity. Let's run some experiments and test for ourselves if our assumptions are correct. And we probably would have found out that our assumptions were flawed and we could have become the next Starbucks. So for me, that was an incredible mistake on our part. It took me 20 years to figure that out. So, but when I was introduced to design thinking, I realized what a flaw convergent thinking can have in an organization.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that story. We've got some questions. We're going to go to Trish in a second, and then we'll go to Donna. But what I really like the emphasis on the thinking part, right? So a lot of times I will have sessions with or talk to folks who have some of you even have certificates in design thinking, but they approach it in a very dogmatic way, right? They believe like if we simply do the steps, then we're going to have this great outcome at the end. So they do the sort of the design steps, but they never do the actual thinking. And what I like to tell folks is that if we can work, just like you said, if we can work on the mindset, right? If I can lead you to think more creatively and to think more inquisitively, right? To lead with curiosity and to lead with the human that you are trying to serve. Now it almost doesn't matter which methodology you use. You can use practically any methodology and get to a great end. But if you have the methodology and not the mindset, you're going to have disappointing results each time. So I'd love to go to Trish real quick for her question, please.
Karen, hi, good morning. It's always great to see you. Hi. Hey, I just wanted to touch base and maybe just ask you one of your favorite stories of someone who began design thinking and had an aha moment, because I mean, I know that your inspiration runs deep and true. And maybe either between Daniel Holter and Donna Whitaker, maybe talk a little bit about the military decision-making process and how it either could be improved by some design thinking fairy dust, or some ways that design thinking might fit into that space.
Well, Trish, you probably know exactly what story I will tell. So the other sort of learning for me, and the other reason why design thinking is so deeply personal to me, is that my husband's grandfather revolutionized naval aviation with prototyping. So his name was Leroy Grumman. He was the founder of Grumman Aerospace, and revolutionized naval aviation with an eraser and 2 paper clips. The Secretary of the Navy came to Grandpa and asked him to figure out how to double the number of aircraft on aircraft carriers. At that time, all planes had fixed wings, and the obvious solution was to fold the wings up. And what they found was that there was no stability in the wing. When you folded it up, the wings would snap, and there were lots of naval aviators that died in the process of doing this. And what Grandpa was able to figure out just by inserting these paper clips into the eraser was that the problem was really the problem of a pivot. And if you could fold the wing back on the body of the plane, like the wing of a bird, then you could maintain the stability in the wing, and you could fold it back so that it could save space. Grandpa was really the person who helped me understand that there's an alternative language, and that's the language of visualization. And you can make things real, and our brains are really optimized for visual learning, which is why I'm so glad we have a graphic illustrator working with us today. But our minds make more meaning with visual images than they do with an auditory language. And Grandpa wasn't deaf, he wasn't mute, but he just preferred a visual language to an auditory language. I grew up in a family of lawyers, and we talked a lot. So this was new to me as a young bride. I didn't really understand a household that really didn't use a lot of auditory language. But a visual language as an alternative language is a powerful, powerful language for change.
So I really love that story, right? As a pilot, I really very much resonate with that as well. But I also, I think it's interesting what you're saying about essentially argument and rhetoric and its role in design also. So I'm a huge fan of Dr. Lidka, and I was rereading her work last night in defense of strategy as design, because it's really the one paper that changed my view of design thinking and the way that I approach it. But I love what she says, that there's no facts of the matter of design, right? You never have an objectively great thing, right? Either it serves the values and serves the people and solves the problem for those people that you're trying to solve, or it doesn't. And that's all about making your assumptions clear and being explicit and engaging in this discussion, particularly as the problem gets more ephemeral, right? As you're talking about something like strategy and trying to apply design thinking to it. And I think really that role of values is incredibly important there as well. But I don't want to dominate the conversation. I know Donna has a question as well. So please, Donna.
So my question was, hi, Karen. Thank you for doing everything that you're doing. I'm super fascinated by what you're bringing forth with design thinking and how it factors into the human experience. So in very strong hierarchical environments like the military, and Trish kind of alluded to it, how in that sense-making place where you're trying to understand the other people that you might be working with, but their behavior, their outward behavior is very nuanced towards expectations and structure in that hierarchy. How do you best use design thinking to understand them or get into their space? Because there's always going to be, not always, but very often there's this facade, right?
Right. So I would say that I do not engage people in debate about whether design thinking is an appropriate problem-solving strategy when I'm working with colleagues. I recommend that people use it as their secret sauce. I think it's a waste of time to engage in debate because people are either on a personal journey to become more empathetic and to become more curious, to make sense of someone else's world, to learn from testing, or they are not. And I am not going to be able to change them. So if you are in an organization that has an experimental unit, Naval X has provided really the air cover and the space and the place to experiment. That's a great opportunity to do that. Daniel Holter is working, who's on this call today, is doing the same thing in the Air Force. So there are opportunities within the military to practice, but also have the air cover and the executive support, because I think without a boss who is providing you with encouragement and it is very difficult to do this kind of work. So I recommend that people do it as their secret sauce, because then you get to great results and people have no idea how you accomplish that.
That's
Okay.
awesome.
Thank you for that.
So I would recommend, if you take a look at the work that Dean is working on right now, or a visual representation of today's discussion, if you right click up there, you can pin that video and take a look at it in a large framework there as well. But also, I like to ensure that on these, as well as everything that we do, we let folks walk away with something that is very practical that they can apply right away. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is that design is all about values. What do you value? And no solution is going to work for you, no matter how innovative it is, if it doesn't meet those values, whether it's aesthetics or practicality or reliability. And I would encourage you to look around the space where you are right now and think, if a design thinker came into the space where you are, what would they say your values are? What would their observation of your space lead them to conclude about you and the things you value? And then ask yourself, is that right? Is that the things that you actually believe you value? And now start to work that into simply the space where we work or the things that you do each day. And Kieran, we only have about 2 minutes or so left. Do you have any quick tips for folks about something they can instantly do to make themselves better design thinkers? I'll let you finish coughing there for a second.
I know, sorry.
No problem.
In this dry mountain air.
Yes.
Well, so I would say something completely unrelated to design thinking. I would say go out into nature and take a walk and improve your observation skills, right? I think one of the things that we can do to become better design thinkers is to improve our observation skills. And so I get outside and go take a walk. I'm in the mountains of Idaho right now, and I'm spending my afternoons doing that. And just set yourself a goal to look for 20 new things. There's so many simple ways to improve your observational skills, and I think nature can teach us a lot about doing that.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate everything that you've brought to us today, and I know that folks would love to connect with you. So if you don't mind, if you can post your LinkedIn in the chat,
sure.
then we'll do that. We like to encourage folks to build a community of folks who are thinking along the same lines. Also, Rebecca, what can you tell us about next week?
Sorry, I was on mute. So we're going to have Jordan Fetter from AFWorks as our guest speaker next Monday. Very excited.
Yeah, and I think it's a great extension of this conversation, going from the design thinking part to the place where it's actually being implemented and folks looking to make change. And we've had several shout outs to Daniel Holter, so I know folks would love to connect with you, the work you do there, also through the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. Project Editari is a great place for folks to connect with us and learn more about what's going on. So again, thank you for being with us today. This has been a great session, and the time really flew by. There's tons of other questions I would like to get to, so maybe we'll be able to do those in the chat as we go through. So thank you very much for being with us. Karen, thanks for your time. And
Thank
I'd
you.
also like to, real quick, we'll spotlight Dean's graphic recording. Thank you very much, Dean, for the work that you're doing here. Always love seeing these, and really helps to pick out what are the key elements of the conversation. So thank you there.
My pleasure.
All right. So we look forward to seeing you next week, or seeing you on LinkedIn or on Slack. Have a great day and enjoy your week. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.